I'm excited today to be talking to Alex Sanfilippo. Alex is the host of Creating a Brand, a top 20 entrepreneur podcast where he interviews successful leaders and experts on topics that matter to entrepreneurs who want to grow faster both personally and professionally while saving time and money in the process. And who doesn't? Alex is also founder of PodMatch.com, which is where we connected. And this is why he's now a guest on my podcast. So I can't wait to ask him more about that. Alex, welcome to the Go for Launch podcast.
Brandon, thank you so much for having me. I've really actually enjoyed listening to your show. We did connect on PodMatch, but I instantly found your website and started listening to some episodes. So I've enjoyed hearing your topics that you cover, and it's an honor to be here with you today.
Oh, thanks so much. Well, I always start by asking guests, where are you today? And since you said you're at a friend's or brother's or whatever, I want to know what are we looking at for those who are watching the video, and you go over to YouTube and check this out.
Yeah, so my neighbor, as we talked about, Brandon, my neighbor is doing some major construction. I was afraid he'd be able to hear it. So I called my brother and I was like, hey, can I go over to your condo? Like, he works a 9-to-5 job. So I'm like, can I go over there and do some recording? And he's like, sure. He gave me, I had a key and stuff like that. And so behind me, he's like a huge Captain America fan. So, I mean, I'm looking at like figurines of Captain America, like some limited edition stuff. And I don't know what all the shoes are behind it, but anyway, it's a pretty cool place. I was like, man, it would have been way more boring if y'all would have been like watching me at my own home. So excited to be here, but I'm in Jacksonville, Florida, and it is beautiful here this time of year.
Oh yeah, excellent. Well, I bet it's a little bit warmer than it is here in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I am. Yes, technically Huntersville, but well, that's great. Well, I want to talk to you mostly to get started about your background and how you got started as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you want to go back many years, I started off by selling used golf balls in my neighborhood golf course when I was a kid. I had the idea to pull them out of the lakes and thought that if we could get them out of the lakes, maybe the golfers would want them back. And sure enough, we proved it real quick. These guys wanted to buy it. So that was kind of that's what opened me up to entrepreneurship, if you will. And I realized I really enjoyed it. And it wasn't just having money at the end of the day. As a kid, it was great. I was 10, 11 years old and I had money. And that was kind of cool. But what I really enjoyed was the act of making a process behind a business. So I really fell in love with that. And I just kind of carried that along into my adult life. And for many years, actually, I just retired I left after 15 years in an aerospace company that initially, when I started with, it was a very small startup company. And it's now a publicly traded, very large company. But I did 15 years there working with them. And that's something I've always enjoyed. And more recently, I started a podcast a few years ago. And now I'm full-time doing PodMatch. And it's been a really fun journey along the way.
I love it. A couple of things you said there struck my fancy. The aerospace industry, obviously the inspiration for Go for Launch. What were you doing with the aerospace company?
Yeah, so first off, I wasn't an astronaut and I wasn't a fighter pilot or a skydiver. Everyone always assumes I'm one of those things. But what I was doing was actually working in a manufacturing company. So we were actually doing part support for certain type of aircraft that are less than 20 passenger planes. And we're doing full-on manufacturing for them, and I ran the processes and the profit margins for the company. So my job was just to make sure we're staying profitable and we're running efficiently. And those are two things that are come more natural to me over the years, just because I've had so much training in those areas. So it was really fun to be part of, and it was aerospace is global and even into space, so it's really fun to be able to just have that impact on the world.
I love that. I bet you saw up close as well that process, like you said, is just super huge in every industry, but particularly something that is so complex, literally like rocket science, right? However, what is very cool to me is if you look back at the history, like the Apollo program, and when they landed on the moon, these guys back in the day, they had, really crude computers, right? The watches that we have on our hands right now and the smartphones have like super computing powers compared to the old lunar capsules or whatever. But what they did have, which I found so cool, is they had these wrist, manuals that they could flip, and they ahead of time documented everything they were going to have to do. So they didn't have to worry about trying to think about it. So every complex thing to me can be broken down in simple processes, which I'm sure you learned firsthand working at something like a spacecraft manufacturer.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. Sometimes we get some of these older parts in that were surplus. We'd be buying an inventory to kind of break it down or remanufacture something. And we get these parts from the 60s and the 70s, and I'd hold it and be like, this flew at one point. Like, this was on something that was flying. I'm like, this is scary,
Right.
And granted, in 20 years from now, 30 years from now, someone's going to look at what we're using today and be like, what were they thinking? But I guess that's the progression of how it works. But it's really interesting to be able to kind of see where it's come from and where it's going now.
Love it. And I also read at one point you had a blog that was really successful, and you had gotten up to the point where you actually had 130 writers writing for that blog. So I want to ask you, what is your current thinking about blogging? Do you still recommend it as a primary strategy? And, if you start a blog in today's world, so crowded is with all the content being shared, do you still feel that's a good place to go?
Yeah, actually, I do. I didn't mention that originally. It's because I'm more like on the advisory board of that now. So there's a team that runs that and everything like that. And that's still an active blog. It's dailyps.com. And it's always been focused on positivity. So it's based around the Christian faith and it just shares Jesus with people. So it's all about love, positivity. And it's a really cool project. And I still write for them once a month. It's something that I love to do. But I am passionate about blogging because I've seen the impact it's had in my life. But also in others. And then there's also the SEO side of it. So people still love to read. I mean, people read books all the time. So it's just a quick way to get a thought out there. And from the SEO perspective, I mean, I know that now podcasting and videos are showing up in search results as well. However, the majority of the time, it's still blog posts. It's website content that people are writing. So for me, it's always in any strategy that I do. Now, whether that I'm doing it the right way on all these projects, maybe not. So for like my podcast show notes, I don't go full on SEO trying to rank on everything I can. That's more so that's there for my audience so they can have a resource. However, there's some content pieces I've written because I say I want to rank for this. And when you do that, it does bring a lot of traffic and exposure to what you're doing. So I think blogging is still very alive today.
Got it. I do think a lot of people, though, go in with sort of their eyes wide open thinking it's such a green field. Hey, I'll just start blogging and people will just flock to my website. That is not typically the case. And I think the secret sauce that you landed on was actually having a lot of people contributing to it. You don't necessarily need over 100, but you may need at least 5-10 people contributing to it so that the content is regularly updated. Isn't that the case now that Google really looks for fresh content? You can't just blog once a week, a couple times a month when you feel like it.
Exactly. I mean, it's got to be consistent. It's got to be current as well. So if you're talking about, okay, at the end of 2019, I did this, or in 2019, I did this, and now it's about to be 2021, that's not okay, right? Like that, Google's going to look at that and say, okay, this is possibly outdated content. So there's that piece of it. Also, if you're just blogging for fun, do it. That's great. If you have a small audience, it's a hobby, that's really cool. If you're wanting to rank and you're wanting to build something that's really big, you have to know a lot about the topic because Google ranks the best content that it can find on any given topic. So if you're not a great writer on it or you're not the subject matter expert on it, it's going to be really hard for you to actually rank. More so, you're just going to end up in pages of results, right? So you have to really know what you're writing about, find that craft. And that's why I'm a big fan of having multiple people writing on a blog. Bring guest posts in. So even me, we're getting ready to launch the blog for PodMatch. It's going to be about podcasting. I don't know all things podcasting. What I've started doing is finding people that already have ranking posts on certain topics that they know exceptionally well and asking them to come write something on that topic as well with me. It gives them great exposure. We'll link to them, but also they know more about it than I do. So my post just naturally won't rank as well because it's not as good information. Again, Google is looking for that best information, and how their AI figures out what's best, I think that's beside everybody at this point, including the people that built it.
Yeah, I love that. So from your daily PS site now to the new PodMatch, another secret that you've discovered, and are no secret, but to be niche down and basically talking about a subject in a vertical format, so that you're talking about it from not 1 inch deep and a mile wide, but like a mile deep and an inch wide. So and I think I stole that from John Lee Dumas of Entrepreneur on Fire. But yeah, you have to be that subject matter expert. And to that point, before we leave the topic of blogging, are you a fan of writing the longer posts now, the 1,500 words versus the old days where you could just crank out a bunch of 250 word blog posts, a few times a week?
So for me, that's a super good question, by the way. And yes, the longer form content tends to rank, but again, Google's looking for the best. So if you use more words, not always, but usually you can convey more information on one single topic. So that's something to consider and think about. But for me, I always write with my readers in mind. So example, going back to Daily PS, we found the sweet spot that people were interested in reading was about 600 words. That's where the most people would finish blog posts. So we started writing for 600 words. People that are in SEO, they were like, no, you need to write longer content. It's just not what our audience wanted. We wanted to support them. So I think the first thing you have to do is think about, what do your people want? If I could use an example, actually, Seth Godin.
I was going to say, he's the man, right? Yeah.
He's written over, I talked to him last week. I had him on my podcast.
Oh, wow. Great.
It was awesome. He's so much smarter than me. I could barely keep up. But he's written over 7,500 blog posts. I'm not even sure where it's at now, but something like that. But he hasn't missed a single day in something like, I don't even know how many years, like years. It's more than 10 years, more than 15 years, something like that. Hasn't missed a day. And his is more general. But because he's been doing it for so long, it's turned out that way. From day one, no one was reading it. It was him and his mom reading it, right?
Right.
He's just done it for so long. So consistency is the big thing. I'm not saying go general. I think that he'd have a hard time starting that today. He just started very early, so he's able to get that traction. But no matter what your topic is, stick with it and be consistent. Write every single day. I'm not saying post something every day, but devote a little bit of time to it so you get better and better at it. And that's really going to help you in the long run with blogging.
That's great advice. And I'm so glad you said Seth Godin, because I was going to say the same thing. Yeah. So great minds think alike. I mean, that guy is amazing, and he has built the audience over time. But I just remember for years too, he was also on kind of a crappy platform. His site didn't look very good. I hope it's better now. But, that was not an issue either. Right. So people were always saying, oh man, Seth Godin's site looks like crap, whatever. But it was the message. It was the man behind the message. People wanted to read it. And he was never one to succumb to having to write 1,200 words just because people said that was the thing to do now. If it was 200 words that day, great. But you were guaranteed that the message, because it was from Seth, was well thought out and it was impactful. So he can write tweets and they're better than, 1,500 word articles that people crank out. So
yeah, and his blog is the number one for a single author blog. It's the number one blog in the world, like as far as readership, which is nuts. But to kind of end this, because I know you wanted to move along, I'll just kind of give this example. Because a lot of bloggers struggle with perfectionism, because there's a lot of beautiful blogs out there now, but that's not the most important thing. Think about going to a restaurant. If you went to a restaurant that was absolutely the most beautiful restaurant you ever went to and the food was terrible, you would never go back. If you went to a restaurant that just looked okay from the outside, it wasn't that great looking, it was just decent, average, but the food blew your mind, you would go back time and time again. It's the same with your blog. Your content has to be incredible. People forgive you for the way it looks. Do improve it over time, but just make sure that you're focused on the main thing and keeping it the main thing.
Yeah, I love that as well, because we all have blog envy. We're all looking around.
For sure.
Going, oh my gosh, right? Like, oh my gosh, that guy's blog looks much better than my blog. And so then do you stop and pull your hair out and think, oh, I need to redesign my site? No, you just need to focus, like you said, making sure the content is good. Eventually you can improve it. But to your point, we all know those, rundown restaurants that we go to where the food is killer and you don't really care how seedy the neighborhood is or the parking lot or whatever. Once you're in, they're going to take care of you. So that's great. Yep. Well, let's move on to podcasting, which is another awesome topic. And by the way, I want to guest post on the topic of how to be a perfect podcast guest, because I did a post about this several years back and it ranked really well. Great. And I know a lot about that. And so a lot of people mess that up too. You're not doing that. You're doing a good job. Thank you.
You made me a little nervous for me. I'm like, uh-oh, he knows everything.
Rule number one, listen to the podcast so that you know what the style is like. But let me ask you, how did you get started in podcasting? How far back did it go? And then what led you to starting PodMatch?
Yeah, so the long this is can be a long story as well, but basically years ago when we launched Daily PS, a few years after that, we were looking for more ways to diversify the content. So we tried video for a little bit. Our audience, we really found, by the way, they liked to read. They were people that wanted to read blogs, and that was okay. So the video side never really did that well for us. So we actually stopped it years ago, but we decided to do a once a month podcast. So I did that. And that's still going to this day, and it's extremely successful. It's funny. It's a very big podcast, and I put much less effort into it than I do creating a brand podcast. But anyway, that's a story for another time. But I decided on my own. I was like, you know what? I want to go ahead and launch my own podcast as well. And this was about 5 years ago, and I launched it and totally failed. Didn't know what I was doing. Didn't even think to go look for help. I just decided, okay, I can figure this out and do it. And it was really not good. And so I took some time off of it. Like I was just like, maybe this isn't for me. Like, I don't know. I stopped. And 2 years ago is when I decided that, you know what, I do want to do podcasting. Like I really enjoy the Daily PS one that I'm doing. It's only once a month. It's a 15-minute episode, but I love it. Like I want to do this for myself as well. And that's when the idea for creating a brand came forth. And I just decided to give it a shot again. But this time I took my time. I didn't just like pick up my phone and start recording, which although that is good advice, get started, right?
Yeah. Don't agonize too much.
Yeah. But I decided to actually look at, okay, do I need like a host? Do I need a microphone? Do I need a website with what do I need with it? And I probably spent a little more time than I needed to, but I had already failed with it. So I kind of found some people that could teach me the success system, if you will. And I probably even read one of your blog posts at one point or another, Brandon. But I really sought out like the good advice. And when we launched Creating a Brand, it did exceptionally well. Still this day is doing very well. And we've never missed a week. We just keep it going every single week. Every Tuesday there's a new episode. And we're seeing the numbers continue to rise. But yeah, starting it was one of those things that I failed the first time I did. And this was my second go around at doing my own podcast.
Oh, well, you're not alone in that. And I've had my successive podcast failures like many of us. I mean, my first one, I think, was in 2008, roughly, Web Business Freedom. That might have lasted all of 6 episodes before
Wow,
I got,
that was really early.
Yeah.
Great.
I got real sidetracked. I was super, excited about it. There were a couple guys back in the day, and there's still one of them, at least still around, Internet Business Mastery. Those guys were early mentors to Pat Flynn, who went on to big and great things with smart passive income. But, Pat was starting around the same time. But again, shows you that the consistency pays off. Pat stuck with it. Pat's show started to take off. Pat Flynn is a legend now, right?
Right.
But you mentioned the analysis paralysis part, which is stops people from blogging and also stops people from podcasting because they think, oh my God, if I'm a writer, I got to be like super perfect and crank out these 2,000 word, novels every day. Oh my gosh, this is crazy. I can't do that. Or in the podcasting world, oh, I need to go run out and get like some super expensive $400 microphone with boom stands and all this kind of crazy stuff. No, you could just get a USB mic like the one I'm using.
And me.
I just keep going back to this little guy going, you know what? It works great. And it was like $75 or whatever, as opposed to the closet full of stuff I can show you, all the Samsung mics and whatever I've got, lots of mixing boards and stuff that I've acquired over the years.
Right.
It's just it's like a Pandora's box or Goodwill closet full of recording equipment. That stuff doesn't matter. It's the consistency. It's like you said, this podcast, same as you, I put it out regularly every single week, like clockwork. Other people have, burst that bubble, like John Lee Dumas, Entrepreneur on Fire, who famously was putting them out every single day for years.
Still blows my mind.
Right now he's backed off maybe 5 days a week. Still, that is a hell of a production schedule, right? And you and I both know that unless you're just doing this recording and then walking away and somebody else is doing all the work part of it is tedious after the fact, editing, getting the files ready, uploading them, etc. Another factor though, is when you decide, like you said, you went back to the drawing board and you said, do I need a host, this and that? I do a show where I'm the single host, which is good. So I don't have to schedule with somebody else's time and coordinate like that with, multiple hosts, but I do interviews like this. So that's another layer, another challenge. If you take that on, then you have a challenge of finding good guests. That is what PodMatch, MATCH.com is all about. Tell us about where the seed from that, came from, and how you got started with it, and how is it doing today as far as matching guest and podcast host?
Yeah, first off, great segue, man. Come on, Brandon, you're like a rock star at this.
I've done this a few times. Thank you.
You have. I actually listened earlier. I don't mean to get off track. I'm going to answer your question, I promise. But I think it was episode 101 where you had Carrie Macklin, I think was her name.
Yeah, from Northern Ireland. She was great.
Yeah. Great accent, first off. I thoroughly enjoyed the episode, though, just talking about training leaders with an entrepreneurial mind. Like, brilliant. So, I mean, you're great at this. Like, I've thoroughly enjoyed your podcast. And if anyone's listening to this and they haven't heard that one, go back to 101.
She does have a great accent, too, by the way. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, it was cool. It was fun to listen to. And that's one of the reasons I like the interviews. But anyway, now, sorry to answer your question. Great segue, by the way. But yeah, PodMatch, the idea from it is actually really interesting. I think it could add a lot of value to your audience for me to kind of explain how it came into fruition. So for me, I'm an entrepreneur and I have ideas, right? Like most entrepreneurs, we have ideas all the time. I found that my ideas aren't actually that good. Like my ideas usually make for bad businesses. Like I've tried and failed more things than most people could probably imagine.
Guilty.
But it's funny, right? But you talk to any entrepreneur that's successful, even John Maxwell says, I've failed more times than I'll ever succeed. It's because he's not afraid to keep on trying and going after it. But I knew that something had to change. So I was like, all right, I want to keep on trying things, but I need a different way to do this. And somebody really painted this framework that I had just never really fully visualized. But they said, instead of coming up with an idea, come up with an idea based off of somebody's problem that you can serve. And so what that meant was for me, the podcasting space is just I've fully gone into this space with creating a brand. The podcast is done, like I said, very well. I speak at most of the conferences, even though they're all virtual now. Like I'll still speak at most of them. But I went to one when there was still that was a thing. Like physically went to a conference, and I walked in with the idea of having having this mindset shift of, okay, I'm going to find how I can serve these people. So I walked in and just started asking people, hey, what are you struggling with? Like, what's the pain point for you in podcasting? And I found out something really interesting. I talked to about 2,000 people at this conference. I talked to probably 200 of them, maybe 10%. But I found people in the room saying, I just can't find the right guest. It's hard for me to keep the podcast going. Sometimes, it's a Monday and I need to release an episode on Thursday. I don't have a guest yet. And talking about how that's kind of the pain point for them. And then in the same room, I find out that tons of authors like to go to podcasting events because they want to get interviewed. And they're asking me, they're like, well, how can I meet the podcasters here? Like, I don't know how to find the right ones. Everyone I talk to is like in the wrong category and I can't find the right people. And this was a light bulb moment for me. I found the problem. Now all I needed was to have an idea for the solution. So the problem was they can't find each other. They're literally in the same room. The podcast guests and hosts can't find each other. Like, I have to find a way to do this. And it was actually during mid-workout. I remember I was holding a kettlebell and doing some swings, and out of nowhere it just like clicked. It just hit me. So I ran inside, ran up to my whiteboard, and just for some reason the whole thing just like panned out. And basically, I don't usually call it this, but basically I was like, could we do something like online dating apps, but for podcast guests and hosts? Could they match together and message each other and do interviews? And I pitched the idea to a friend who I had worked with previously on one of his projects. So we knew we had good synergy. And I called him up and told him, like, hey, I think I got a good idea. And he dropped, like, he was just starting a project. He dropped the project. It was one of his own. So it wasn't like hurting anybody by doing that. But he's like, I'm going to stop this project. Let's do this, run it full force. So it was March 10th, 2020 when we had the idea, when I put on a whiteboard. And by June 15th, 2020, we actually launched it into early beta with 100 people to test it. Believe it or not, those 100 people were in that room that I talked to. I got their information. So I actually used them to kind of test it initially. And here we are just a few months later. And we're now about to, today we'll actually hit 2,000 members, which I'm really excited about. And it's really, it's the solution that people were looking for. Every day we get emails of people thanking us for it, talking about how they're getting to interview guests they never imagined they'd be able to have, and vice versa, saying I'm not going to cancel my podcast anymore because now I'm getting guests. It's been really fulfilling and really cool to see. And it's all because I sat back and listened and offered a solution to a problem that people had.
That is fantastic. And congratulations, by the way, not only with the idea, but also the speed of execution. And I would say the fact that you and your partner did not look around the landscape and go, oh, gee, there are already a couple of things out there that are already doing this. Maybe we're late to the party. The fact is, good ideas you can never be too late with, and this one is good. And I would say, as a user now, what I found refreshing is the interface and the algorithm behind it. There's a lot of good matching going on where the podcast host, get to go in there and explain what my show is, and then you use tags, basically hashtags or descriptive words like entrepreneurship, marketing, etc. And then the potential guests are also ranking themselves. And so the ones, we match up. It's like you said, it's like a dating app. If somebody is an entrepreneur and I got a show about entrepreneurship, they're like, oh, I could be a good match potentially. So it's very cool. And then I'm now getting these inbox messages. Hey, you've got a match on PodMatch. I'm like, cool. So I go look and, I've had half a dozen people.
That's great. I love hearing that, man.
Which is
You're
awesome.
making my day right now.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess the big question is, you got to monetize a business. How is what does the money look like? How does that change hands? Who pays for the service?
Yeah, so it's a little bit unique. And again, you did mention there's some other people that are sort of in this space. We're really the only ones doing matching right now. There's some other directories and things like that. But at the end of the day, we looked at the size of those programs and we looked at the size of the industry. And I would be a fool, along with any of them. I shouldn't call them fools. I would be a fool. They would be not smart to think that any of us are going to be able to serve this entire industry ourselves. We actually need each other. And if there's something you can learn from actual data and facts, it's that if there are more people in the same space, then they all do better. The perfect example is a gas station. If there's 3 gas stations on a corner, all 3 do better than if there's only one.
Right.
Because it becomes something people know about. So I've reached out to all the competitors and told them, hey, I'm getting into the space. Here's what I'm doing. And I've referred to myself. I said, I don't want us to call each other competition. I want us to be co-educators in a space that this exists to serve the podcasting industry.
Sure.
So for me, that's always been the mind. So when we launched this thing, the idea was, how can we make this free for as many people as possible to truly serve an industry that, for me personally, like Alex Sanfilippo speaking, this industry has served me so well. Like, I launched my podcast and it did well, not because of me, because the people I surround myself with. It just freely helped me. So the mindset was, how can we make this free for as many people as possible? So basically we do it is it's free for the guest and for the host. And there's an optional professional plan that people can upgrade to. And the way we put it before we started is we believe that 10% of people would upgrade to that. Today, I can tell you that we have 9% of people upgrading. So we're very close to where we thought we'd be.
Okay.
And we knew that we could sustain it with just that. Like that will be plenty lucrative for us. And those are people that are like the power users that just want more matches. They want, maybe they're doing a daily podcast like John Lee Dumas used to do, and they need a lot.
Right.
So if you're a basic user, as we call it, then you can do 5 matches per week. And for most people, like we said, 90% of the industry, that is perfectly fine. You are never going to that's not going to cause any pain point for you. But for the 10% of people that just really want that extra boost, that's what it's for. And again, we're really finding we're able to do that. So that's the model we went with. That's what we really wanted to do to, again, serve the industry that we care so much about.
Well, it's working great. Like I said, congrats. It's and I just love it. So it's PodMatch, PodMatch.com. Go check that out. You can look me up or put yourself in there. But I am approached by a lot of others in different ways. Now there are a handful of people out there I've worked with whose businesses are to charge typically a fairly hefty fee to subject matter experts to get placed on podcasts. And I do think that there's a place for that with somebody actively working on your behalf, almost like a publicity agent, you know, understanding the landscape of the podcasts out there, getting to be on friendly terms with some of these podcast hosts, and then working that circuit so that, you're pitching Alex to Tim Ferriss or somebody. And then in that case, they're earning their money if they can get some of these subject matter experts on the bigger podcasts, even a John Lee Dumas. I mean, because he's got a massive audience. If you get a placement on his show, it's golden for you as the guest, right? Not as big on my show. I mean, I like to think my show is good and it's got awesome guests and stuff. But
it's good. It's really good.
Yeah. And unlike John or Seth or whatever, there are probably not 4,000 people in line, banging on the door saying, I want to be on the podcast. But so those exist, but some of those other marketplaces, like you said, really more of a free for all, just lots of people in there. And I think you've done a good job with vetting. It seems that, you're probably not just going to let anybody in there. Like you're going to have some sort of vetting process where you just can't claim to be a subject matter expert and suddenly be listed in there and blasting out your stuff to a bunch of people like me. So that's hats off for that reason. And I think that's going to be a differentiator too. You kind of have to moderate and make sure that the quality of the guests is at a certain level. And also that people like me aren't just saying no to everybody. I've already, I lined you up as the start of, founder of PodMatch. I was like, that would be cool. And all the rest of the stuff you did. And then I've got 2 or 3 other guests lined up between now and the end of the year. So that's awesome.
Love it, man.
And
so cool.
Yeah. And, I'm kind of winding down like many podcasters do at the end of the year. I'm not like looking to just, do interviews galore. However, I'm starting to think ahead, like January hits, I am going to need to have a big backlog of people ready to go. So I may be upping the ante at some point to get more people into the pipeline, as that goes. So that's great. All right. So let's talk something else here. What advice would you give to somebody, Alex, who's just thinking about starting a business? You've done it multiple times now.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that people need to do, the first thing, it's a mindset. First off, you have to be in the mindset not of like, I need this to be huge or to like be perfect or anything like that. You have to get in the mindset of how can I execute the most meaningful work every single day. So if you're getting started, you have the idea, you know what you want to do, find what actually drives the results instead of just saying, okay, I need a website, I need a blog, I need a YouTube, I need a podcast, like all these different things that the world might say you need. Don't listen to that. Figure out what the most important thing is that you can do that drives the majority of the results, and then start releasing it. I'll use PodMatch as the example. When we launched on June 15th, 2020, it was ugly. Like it's still not that beautiful yet, but we didn't have a logo. We didn't have anything. Like it was all plain text. And some people were even like, man, this doesn't look that great. But at the end of the day, we knew that if we could get that minimum viable product launched as quickly as possible, we could make improvements off of real feedback instead of just living in a fantasy for 6 months or even a year. There's many people that still would not have launched PodMatch if they were the ones doing it, which means that they'd be 2,000 members behind where I am. So if you're just getting started, again, figure out what the most important thing is. Write it down every single day when you wake up. What's the one thing that you can do that day that will drive the majority of the results of what you're doing? I guarantee you it's not doing another post on Instagram necessarily or starting a blog with it. Like there's got to be the one thing that's the most important. I think that's always what I want to tell people is to make sure that you're focused on what matters, because so many of us, we prolong launching because we want it again to be perfect, or we want to have all this giant suite of products before we launch. But at the end of the day, just figure out the one thing and get started with that.
I think that's fantastic what you just said, especially I'm chuckling at the part where you said you didn't even have a logo, because a lot of people get hung up in that part of it. It's real sexy and fun in the beginning when you're coming up with a name and then spending a bunch of time creating a logo and then all the derivatives of it to make sure it's perfect on all the different social media platforms. And then let's just spend a lot of time, agonizing over getting our name on every social media platform and then blah, blah, blah. Right. And before you even build anything. So to your credit, you just went ahead and built the thing, minimum viable product, like you said, get it out there. It's a little ugly, but it's functional enough and people can use it. And then you start to get immediate feedback, which is also cool because a lot of people would just sit there and do research and focus groups forever and a day to figure out, will this fly or will this not fly, etc. Sometimes you just got to build it. Now, did you guys use any no code or low code tools, or did you kind of go all in and hire a developer to build the thing? What route did you take there?
Yeah, so the partner I mentioned, the reason I partnered with him is he's a developer, and previously, again, we worked together on a project, so he's actually been able to do all of it on his end, and we're doing all the documentation along the way. But right now, it's just me, him, and my wife is working with us as well. She works on the creating a brand podcast side, but I steal her a little bit for PodMatch, so she helps out with that too. But yeah, so he's doing all that side of things. I'm more the vision side and testing, and getting feedback from people that are using it, because we're really using that as like our test subjects, right? The people that are using it right now, it's still in beta. And but yeah, so he's doing all that. We didn't outsource any of it, didn't have to with this. And I get that some people will. I wouldn't have looked at that as a downside. If you had to, you just would need more capital up front possibly. But if you have a good idea, it's worth throwing money at too. Because in the day, I mean, we're not even on the gold standard anymore. Like money literally is just a number at this point. Like you can make money again. If you lose a lot on something, just go try something else. Like don't ever let that scare you or hold you back. 'Cause I think a lot of people are like, oh, I can't do anything because it's too much money. And they get really like, they hold back on it. If there's one thing I've learned from some of my friends that are, I got a couple of friends, they are 9-figure business owners and they're under 30. And they started off 5 years ago when I knew them with no money at all and like 30 credit cards that were maxed out. I'm like, what are y'all doing? I'm not recommending you do that. Yeah. But they just had zero fear to try something. They're like, we know this will work. We have tested the market. We know that we just have to find the right area to do it. And here they are years later, like literally I can sit with them at dinner and they make like $17,000. Like he showed me his phone in like an hour and a half while I'm sitting there with him. It's crazy, but he really did the time of saying, okay, this is really uncomfortable. I got to just spend the money and try it. And I think a lot of us, we just hold back on that too much. We're like, ooh, $100. I don't know if I can spend that. If you know it's something that's going to work, go all in and give it a shot. If it doesn't work, fine. Then get back to zero and try again. I'm not saying max out a bunch of credit cards, but go ahead and give it a shot. Take a little bit of risk in what you're doing because there's always a good reward with that.
Yeah. Oh, hey, look, Visa Company has been a major sponsor of Brandon Utley's companies through the years. So MasterCard and Visa are your friends. I mean,
right.
Yeah, there's friends, family, venture capitalists, blah, blah, blah. But there's always that opportunity to get the credit cards. And like you said, it's not necessarily the greatest thing, but they work and you can get that stuff quicker than you can a bank loan or venture capital or whatever. Well, let me ask you one final question, because I know you're also a productivity expert and you've gotten a lot done in a short amount of time. So give us a couple of productivity secrets that lead to success.
Yeah. I mean, first off, it's all about that morning routine. I mean, that is just so important, starting the day off right. And part of the morning routine has to be figuring out what the main thing is you're going to do that day, not just waking up and making it all kind of random, right? I think the reason I had to get good at productivity is I was in that aerospace job for a long time and doing a podcast and even starting PodMatch before I left the aerospace job. So it's like I was doing a lot, and people are always like, how are you like still hanging out with friends and things like that? But it's because I just focused on, like I was saying earlier, that most important thing that needed to happen next. So for me, a morning routine actually starts the night before. If you're out drinking the night before, staying up all night watching TV, getting really bad sleep, it doesn't matter what you say your morning routine is, it's not going to be good. So you have to make sure the night before that you're prepping yourself. So for me, I stop eating 2 hours before bed so I can actually get good sleep. That's how you get deeper sleep. I make sure I drink plenty of water. I wind down, I'm not working the last hour I'm awake. I'm not looking at screens. I'm just kind of relaxing. And the next morning I wake up with an alarm after 8 hours of sleep because I want to make sure that I'm getting good sleep so I can really, again, achieve that most meaningful work for the day. When I wake up, I write all that down. I journal every morning. I reflect on, okay, what did I do yesterday? What needs to happen today to continue moving forward? And when you really gain that clarity, Brendan Burchard, he's somebody who says this. He says, the more clear you are, the more you win. So, and the people that are most clear are the ones that reflect the most. So your morning routine has to include some sort of reflection so you can really know where you're going. And productivity, it can be a little bit deceiving because if you're just knocking a bunch of tasks off and always at inbox zero and you finish 30 things a day, that doesn't mean you're productive. It just means you can get a lot done, right? Like you can do a lot of things. You can be busy successfully without getting stressed, but really productive to me means, again, did I do the one thing that mattered today? If I did that, great. I can kind of stop the rest. I can finish my inbox tomorrow. I can do all the rest of the stuff later. What needs to happen is that one most important thing. So I think that the biggest tip for productivity I can give people is just make sure you really know what that is.
I love it. So win the morning and avoid busyness, right?
Yes, right.
Just doing stuff to check off boxes, which is so key. Another guy I love is Craig Ballantyne. I think he wrote the Perfect Day Formula. Sounds like you might have digested that, or you definitely are using the principles from that. He's awesome. But yeah, a lot of people say, win the morning, win the day. And for people who are night owls maybe listening, you got to shift your mindset, because people can still clog up your inbox and get to you at nighttime, right? But when you can get up early before everybody else, it's quiet and you can get things done and set your own agenda. And like Alex is doing, don't get up and check your inbox first thing. I haven't done that for years, man. It's funny. Last night,
dangerous, man.
I went to bed earlier last night, and my wife texted me when I was asleep. And then this morning we woke up, and I woke her up at like 6:45 to go walk. And she was like, "I told you to wake me up at 7." I'm like, I texted you, and I'm like, I don't look at texts, so you're gonna have to come up with another way to let me know. She's like, should I have woken you up? I'm like, I don't know, but I don't check texts, because the second you start checking the texts and the emails, somebody else is controlling your agenda, and that is not a good thing, man. You cannot let that happen. So, unfortunately, if you're working for the aerospace company or another big company, sometimes you feel that pressure from the boss and the higher ups. You've got, they especially now in COVID, everybody's virtual, but they expect you to be working almost 24/7, or at least available. Right. You need to set boundaries and say, look, I'm going to be hardcore available between these hours, but after this time or before this time, that's me. And unless something's super on fire, call me on the phone or whatever, but otherwise don't mess with me. So, and then of course,
that's so true.
Yeah. You got to hope that you get a boss that is going to, respect that. Many people don't. Well, listen, we have been talking to Alex Sanfilippo, founder of PodMatch.com, as well as creating a brand, Top 20 Entrepreneur Podcast. So go check out both. I'll have those over at the show notes page. But again, Alex, thank you so much for what you're doing with PodMatch and for being a guest on my show. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you today.
Yeah, for sure. This was an honor. I love your podcast, what you're doing. The only thing I'm upset about, man, is you had this picture on your Instagram. It was from 1988 with this paisley tie that would blow your audience's mind. You got to start wearing that in these interviews. I'm just kidding, man.
I don't remember that, but I'm going to go look for it now. But all right, man. Well, thanks so much, Alex. Have a great day.
Again, Brandon. Appreciate it.